Good Woche. Started 30 seconds early. And welcome to the shiur. And as you see, I've dedicated the shiur. It's dedicating to the Acheinu Bnei Yisrael who are in Ukraine, or the refugees who have fled Ukraine, which both groups are in need of Yeshua in different forms, and do whatever we can, the Megashmis and Baruchnis, to help them all. I'd like to share with you, I actually got a phone call on Friday from someone who is usually he would be in Lvov, and he's now in Eretz Yisrael. So he says to me that he has people in Lvov, and they're giving out at the center. He's in Eretz Yisrael, but he's managing the operations in Lvov, and they're giving out food on Shabbos. So I didn't really grasp the full situation, but he asked whether the non-Jewish staff member is allowed to heat up the food in microwave, like they have like airline meals, that idea, where the non-Jewish staff member could heat up the meals. So I asked, are they cholim, or are they healthy people? He says, Baruch Hashem, they're healthy. But then I said to him, hang on a second, if they take these meals and take them home, they don't have this, myself carrying on Shabbos. But if they take their meals home, they're going to heat the meals in their own facilities, which will be a bigger avera. So it'll be better for the cleaner, for the Goyish staff member to heat up the meals rather than having them doing this at their Isa. Right, let's start our shiur though. So here we have a question that in some versions of the translations of Tanakh, apparently the Septuaginta writes that Esther was a niece of Mordechai, and so in various non-Jewish sources, that's how it comes across. Is there a source in Torah for that? So we have the Megillah Esther has, in addition to the regular Targum, has got what's called Targum Sheni. I haven't traced exactly the full history of this Targum Sheni, but for example, the opening of Megillah Esther, he has like pages describing the throne of I see a note, there's no screen share, is that right? Okay, so let's see what we can do. Share screen. Oh, there we are. Oh, thank you for that. There we are. We're good. Thank you. So we have this. We're talking about the Targum Sheni on Esther. So the opening has got pages describing the throne of Shlomo HaMelech, because Achashverosh used the throne of Shlomo HaMelech and so on. So I looked up the earliest version of the Targum Sheni, and so here you have, if you can see this print, it's from Venice, Reish Ayin Ches, which is just over 500 years ago, and it has a he Esther Baras Achavoy. So Esther was a daughter of his father's brother, which is the literal translation of Bas Doidoi, that she was a daughter of his uncle, which means his cousin. But then in another print of the Targum Sheni, as you can see the second quote here, Vihi Esther v'havas bas achoy de Mordechai, that she was a daughter of a brother of Mordechai. But not to rely on that too much, because a few lines later in that very same source, it says Esther bas achoy de Avoy. So it describes Esther as a daughter. It was bar, it shouldn't be a bas, obviously. It was she was a cousin. So I mean, the literal translation of the pasuk, bas doidoi, is that she was a niece of a cousin of his. But meanwhile, as I was looking around, I found some fascinating information about this, that we see here that she's called Hadassah Bas Doida. By the way, maybe not so well known, the Seder Hadoides has that Esther was 75 at the time when she was taken to Achashverosh. The gematria of Hadassah is 74. So she was, that's what he says, whatever. But meanwhile, we have the Seder Hadoides has a fascinating thing. That last week we learned a sikha about Rov Anash, how Mordechai was not, when most of the Sanhedrin were happy with what he did, that he remained a governor, but there was a minority of the Sanhedrin, Pirshu Mimenu Mixa Sanhedrin, because they weren't happy the fact that Mordechai became a government minister instead of being a full-time in the Beis HaMedrash. So that was the sikha from Tofshin Lamed Hey, and we learned it last week. So now in the Gemara Shabbos in Daf Nun Gimel Lamed Beis, there's a story, and you have it on the page here. There was a story of a man who his wife had died and left him a little boy, and the boy needed to be nursed, and he didn't have the money to pay for a nurse, a wet nurse. So the Eibishter made a miracle, and his breasts became capable of feeding. He says his daddy and his breast became like the two breasts of a woman, and he was able to breastfeed his son. So here we have a conversation between Rav Yosef and Abaya. Omar Rav Yosef, boy urei kama godel odem zeh. How great is this person? Shenas lo nes kozeh, such a miracle. Says Abaya, Adarabe, to the opposite. Kama garua odem zeh. Shenishtanu lo isidrei breishis. How lowly is this person that the Eibishter distorted the order of breishis in order to feed this person. Omar Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman makes Omar Rav Yehuda. You see, Parnosa is so difficult that the Eibishter could have given him a few dinar. Instead, the Eibishter changed that a male is able to breastfeed, and not to make a miracle to send him money, through the letterbox. Nachman says we see that we have miracles. People are meriting miracles, but we don't have miracles of, just Parnosa just coming through the door. Interesting. So meanwhile, that's the story in the Gemara. So in the Seder Hadoides, my father would say that he was a Baal Ruach HaKodesh. He was a Rov in Minsk about 400 years ago. Now it's 450 years ago, because my father told me 50 years ago. That Mordechai, his neshama came down be'ibur. You have the idea of a pregnancy. That means there can be within a woman, there can be another person. So this idea of a neshama coming be'ibur, coming into another person. So this person described in the Gemara, who had a miracle that he was able to breastfeed his son, he had a connection, a neshama connection with Mordechai. Now, just like Mordechai himself had those who most of Klal Yisrael and most of Sanhedrin applauded, but he had his detractors too. So here we have Rav Yosef, who applauds this person who has this Adam Godel, who had such a great miracle. Abaya, he was sympathizing with the minority of the Sanhedrin, who were not so pleased with Mordechai's going away from the Beis HaMedrash, and in the reflection, he also criticizes this person who had a miracle of to be able to breastfeed, the man to breastfeed his child. What we do see, meanwhile, this idea of Mordechai being oimen es Hadassah, that he was, the literal meaning of oimen is to nurse. So he was nursing Hadassah. So there are several sources which say the same idea, that Mordechai actually was able to feed his Esther as a baby. And bas doidoi can also mean bas dadoi, she was fed from his breast. Just before going on to the next point, the fact that Esther was so much younger than him, so although she may have been technically his cousin, but I can see the idea of being a niece, because she would have looked up at him as an uncle rather than as a cousin because of the obvious difference in age. Later, we know that he married her, and as discussed a lot in Chazal, when Esther was asked by Mordechai, instructed by Mordechai to go to Achashverosh, so she says, "Kasher avadti, as I've been lost, I'll be lost totally." So the Gemara says that she was taken against her will. She was married to Mordechai, and she was taken to Achashverosh against her will. So long as she was, her relationship with Mordechai, with Achashverosh, was against her will, then she's allowed to come back to her husband. But if she would go to Achashverosh willingly, so then once a woman has gone willingly to another man, she's not allowed to go back to her husband. And that's what Esther was saying to Mordechai, Kasher avadati, I'm not only jeopardizing my life, but I'll survive this, but there's no chance of me resuming our marriage. If I get out of this relationship with Achashverosh, I'll be lost because I'll have gone to him willingly. Okay, Adkan in Yoda de Yoima. And now let's go on to a question which two separate people asked me about Parshas Shekolim. It can be any time you take out two Sefer Torah. The question was that Parshas Shekolim was the Parsha of Vayakhel, and Parshas Shekolim is the beginning of Ki Sisa, and which takes about 30 seconds or less to roll the Sefer Torah from Parshas Vayakhel to Parshas Ki Sisa. And yet the minhag is to prepare two Sefer Torah and take out two Sefer Torah, and we switch Sefer Torah after Kaddish, and we read the second, we read Shekolim, etc., from the second Sefer Torah. Two places, same question, but different circumstances. One is that the Gabba had forgotten. In both, the Gabba had forgotten to prepare the second Sefer Torah. In one place, he only realized at the time of Psicha. He opened the Aron Kodesh and realized that the second Sefer Torah is rolled to Parshas Pinchos for Rosh Chodesh. In the other place, they only realized, just came to Maftir, and someone really, we have to have a second Sefer Torah. So in the second case, the rabbi said, instead of taking out a second Sefer Torah, which is Rosh Chodesh, and everybody's going to have to twiddle their thumbs for another 5 minutes, instead of just let's roll the Sefer of Vayakhel, which is on the Bimah, let's roll it to Parshas Ki Sisa, which, as I said, takes 30 seconds. In the other case, the Rov who was there told me that he told them they should take out the second Sefer Torah, although it's a Parshas Pinchos, they will roll it, and they'll roll it in right. So just to analyze what's the halacha here. So we have here, this quote is from Shulchan Aruch, actually it's the Ramah in the Dinim of Simchas Torah. And now Simchas Torah, we take out three Sefer Torah. The first one is we read from Parshas Zochor till the end. Then we take out the second Sefer Torah, and we read Bereshis till Sheni. And the third Sefer Torah we take out, and I believe it's Parshas Pinchas, where we read the Karbonos of Shmini Atzeres. So we take out three Sefer Torah. Says the Ramah, if a shul only has two Sefer Torah, so they should read the first one, B'Zos HaBracha, the second one they'll read Bereshis, and then they take their first Sefer Torah and use that to read the Maftir in Parshas Pinchas. Whenever you need three Sefer Torah and you only have two Sefer Torah, so then you should use the first Sefer Torah will become the third Sefer Torah. So that's the way it's written in the Ramah, which I believe, although it says Motzah Kosov, I seem to remember it's from the Maharil. On this, the Mishnah Brura, in his section called Biur Halocha, he writes the following. You see, he quotes it from a sefer called Chemed Moshe. Chemed Moshe, I believe, was around the time of the Alter Rebbe. It's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. He writes the following. I looked up in the Chemed Moshe itself. This whole idea of taking the third, you don't have the third Sefer Torah, taking the first one, that's only if it's now been rolled to the right place. So then, okay, you had the first Sefer Torah was V'Zos HaBracha. The second Sefer Torah was Breishis, and now you're taking the first Sefer Torah to read in Parshas Pinchas. But meanwhile, the idea is that whilst you're doing Kriyas Torah and between one person and the next, sorry, no, that's not going to work. But whilst you're doing, let's say, the Birshus of Achos and Breishis, so meanwhile you're rolling the V'zei Sabrocha Sefer Torah to Parshas Pinchas. Avo balav hochi, but if not, if the other Sefer Torah is not really on the place, better roll the one which is right on the table, on the bima, and not to start switching. So let's come back to the second story. So it's Parshas Vayakhel. They finished till the end of Shvi, and then they realize, oops, we have to now relay in Parshas Ki Sisa. To take out another Sefer Torah will be at least a 5-minute delay. So here we have, Chemed Moshe asks the question, what's this whole business of switching Sefer Torah? Isn't there a thing of Ein Mavirin ala mitzvahs? You have a mitzvah article right in front of you. Why are you switching Sefer Torah? The answer is because Ein Goylel and Sefer Torah B'tzibur. It's disrespectful to have the congregation waiting whilst you're rolling the Sefer Torah. It's a duty on the Gaber, whoever is responsible, to make sure that the Sefer Torah is ready, that there's no need for the people to wait around whilst the Sefer Torah is being rolled to the right place. That's this concept of Inga. And Ad Kedei Kach, certain halochos have been compromised. We read about the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, what he did, what he even read Baal Peh. He read he read a parsha by heart instead of reading for Sefer Torah, not to keep the people waiting whilst you're rolling the Sefer Torah. So certainly in the second case, where you have Sefer Torah on the bimah, it's a Parshas Vayakhel. To take out another Sefer Torah, which is a Parshas Pinchas, to start rolling it to Parshas Ki Sisa doesn't make sense, and you should actually just roll the one which is there. Whereas the other case, when they realize the mistake at the beginning of Kriyas Torah, they're taking out this first Sefer Torah, and the second one is not the right place. Well, and the rabbi told me he knows that this they tend to make a lot of mishaberachs. So then take out both Sefer Torah and bring the second Sefer Torah should be at one side on a side table, whatever. And whilst there'll be time between aliyahs, etc., you'll roll the Sefer Torah to Parshas Ki Sisa or whatever it may be. And in that way, the tzibur won't have to wait. So there seems to be that the paramount consideration here is that the congregation shouldn't be waiting and nothing doing. That's why we switch Sefer Torah. If the switching is going to cause more delay and more waiting for the tzibur, then on the contrary, just roll the one which you have at the table, at the bimah. Okay, so that was an interesting discovery for myself. Makes a lot of sense, but it's still nice to see it inside. Let's go on. So I had this question from a shliach somewhere in the United States, and he davens, he's an Ashkenazy, a very Ashkenazy name actually, but he davens regularly in a Sefardy shul. And he's asking whether for Parshas, and he's a Sefardy shul, and he often will say it, Dvar Torah there. So he's asking, should he go to another shul to hear the Parshas Zochor in a Ashkenazy dialect? So there are numerous poskim who do make an issue that an Ashkenazi should try to hear the Torah, the Parshas Zochor in Ashkenazy, as far as have a pronunciation, as Sefardy, etc. One should. However, the bottom line is that you are yotzer if you hear it from a different dialect also, because all of the dialects are they're all valid, and therefore, if you hear Shabbos, if you hear Parshas Zochor in a different dialect, you are yotzer. I know there are particularly the Brisker Mahalach is to be very concerned about this and pronounce it again and again. We have the only thing I told him: if you're hearing a Sefardy shul, you won't hear Zecher Zecher because everything is Zecher Zecher. Meanwhile, though, I'd like to address a related point. The Hashem's name is written Yud Kei Vav Kei, and we pronounce it Adoi, and then we finish off with Noi, which means my master. Adonai means my masters in the plural. And so there are various literature poskim who advise Sefardim that although everything else they'll use Sephardi pronunciation, but Hashem's name they should pronounce in the Ashkenazy way. I know that, no surprise, but Rabbi Ovadia Yosef said it's not necessary, but I would like to share with you a couple of answers of the Rebbe. So this is answers of the Rebbe, which you can see it's from the Sefer, it's in the Sefer Shulchan Menachem, which is a compilation of Hanhogas, Ha'oras from the Rebbe in Halocho. So he writes the following. The Rebbe writes, in your reference to you asking about pronunciation, it doesn't matter so much. But in one tefillah, do not mix up two pronunciations. The main thing is the Hergesh Halev, is the feeling, the expression of the heart. Another answer, you can daven in Sephardi pronunciation or Ashkenazi pronunciation, but not to mix. That means the whole davening should be in one pronunciation. There could be, I can understand, sometimes you have people who are, let's say, Ashkenazim, but they are Rabbonim in a Sephardi community. So when they are reading the davening, they may have to do it in Sephardi pronunciation. But to mix in one pronunciation, in one tefillah, the Rebbe says not to mix. Let's read this third letter. You're writing about your pronunciation in davening, that you are used to Polish pronunciation. But sometimes you have to change to Litvische pronunciation. So he says, Hanhoga b'zeh naro naro pashte. You have each community will follow their tradition. Aval ein ra'arev b'zeh mitfilo achas beis havoros. The main thing the Rebbe is concerned not to mix two pronunciations within the same tefillah. Now we have here a couple of points which are brought up in the chat. I'll relate to those now. Let me just go through them. Let's see. Number one. So number one is no screen share. Baruch Hashem, we dealt with that. Someone points that in some places they'll read Parshas Zochor 3 times a different havoras. Fine. So someone is asking here with the Simchas Torah, isn't it quicker to take the first Sefer Torah and roll it from Parshas Pinchas back to from Bezis Abroch to Pinchas, and the second Sefer Torah from Bereshis to Pinchas? Right. So no, the word is, if you have the first Sefer Torah, you're right. In any case, it'll be quicker to roll the first Sefer Torah to Pinchas than to roll the second one. You're right. But if you are able to roll the first Sefer Torah whilst it's off duty, it'll be even faster. I think that's what the Ramah is saying. Let's move on. Okay, so here I had a question. A mashpia in the yeshiva, he says his bocharim are going to go out on Mivtzoyim, and they're going to lay Megillah for people. 2 people, 3 people. What happens if the fellow you're reading Megillah, he may pull out a cell phone and answer a phone call in the middle? And what happens if they fall asleep in the middle? So what's the story? And so he's asking, since that's a likelihood, would it be perhaps not correct to say a bracha for the laning? So I said, if the fellow pulls out his cell phone, so you wait till he finishes the conversation, and then you'll resume. It doesn't invalidate the Kriyas Megillah. If they fall asleep and that's the only person, that's true. That is a problem. But if it comes to daydreaming, so the truth is that we also daydream. Yeah, not only the Amivshoim are there daydreamers. Also in our Bis Medrash, I can talk for myself. And not like Yedei Machshavos, but my own Machshavos. I know that sometimes you get distracted. And so in the Bayer Heitev, he says the following: if you heard the Megillah, your ears were, the words of the Megillah reverberated in your ear, but you weren't focusing. So you are Yotze. Now, just a bit of background. The Gemara has a question about people who don't understand Hebrew. Are they Yotze? And it says, well, we also don't. There's those words, we also don't know. So we're hearing words and we don't necessarily understand them, and that's okay. So if that's the case, then it's also okay for people who don't understand the whole Megillah, don't understand a word of Hebrew, and they're still Yotze by hearing the Megillah. then he brings here in this Pesach Shuvas, he brings that Levushis Rod says that that's only if you didn't mamish focus on the words, but if you were totally distracted, that doesn't count. However, then he brings the others disagree, and they say if you have a kosher Megillah and you're following with a balkoira, even though you are distracted in mind elsewhere, you are yotze. So, but ever you are yotze. Now he says there about having a kosher Megillah. In the footnotes, he brings from the shiur Mitziona Halocho, even if you're following in a chumash and you're following with the balkoira, you're not saying the words, just following and listening. Even though whilst you're following, maybe your mind is distracted, so you're still yotze. So, there are an ample poskim who allow, and the Torah is not given to Malochim. Many of us will drift off in mind a little bit. It's just good. There's a bit of action. That there's banging for hormone and saying psukim. This keeps the focus. Rabbi Shneir Ashkenazy points out that in the Haggadah, you have a lot. Not everyone can sit and listen to the whole Haggadah. So here you have pouring wine, and here you have dipping, and here you have breaking the matzah, and here you have going to the door. There's lots of action going on, and that's very helpful for people who don't have the ability to concentrate for a long time. So there's lots of other distractions, which helps them focus actually. Let's move on. So here, one of our listeners asked, what is the value of a Prutah in today's currency? So he was asking in reference to Matonos loEvyonim packages for Shlachmonos and Purim kits. So there is the Chidush Ritvo, which is quoted in Mishnah Berurah, who says that you yotze Matonos loEvyonim with 2 Prutahs, and that's considered Matonos loEvyonim. So how much is a Prutah? That was the question. So a Prutah was the smallest coin in the time of the Gemara, as far as I know, but it's got a particular value. It's the value of half a barley grain of silver. How much is what's the weight of a barley grain? Sorry, a half of it. So they work it out. That is approximately 1/40th. I think 1 out of 45 of a gram. So the second quote here is from Reb Chaim Noah, who says that the Prutah is chatzis oira of fine silver, refined silver, and so you have to work it out. What's that value today? So you can look online. What's the value of silver today? So it worked out that this past week, silver was a gram of silver was 63 pence. So that worked out that a Prutah would be about 1.5 pennies, which is 1/40th approximately of 63 pence. Now, I'd like to discuss, first of all, let's point out that actually not everyone agrees that your yotze shlachmonos or Matonos loEvyonim with a Prutah. That was the ritva. Others say no, you should actually give something which would be enough to buy a meal. A meal is a minimum of 3 bayim, which is about 6 slices of bread. That's some say that, some say shiur greater. So really, there are those who are a little bit more generous when it comes to what is the minimum for Matonos loEvyonim. I'd like to also address why, where this idea of a Prutah is important for us to know the value of a Prutah. If you do sometimes doing trumas or maasros, so you may have a coin which you use for pidyon maaser sheni. When you do trumas or maasros, there's truma, there's maaser, and there's maaser sheni, and the maaser sheni will be exchanged. The value of the maaser sheni will be exchanged for a Prutah, and so people who do this regularly will have a coin put aside, and every time they'll have, let's say, a 20 pence coin, and every time they do maaser, so then part of that 20 pence is going to be ticked off to be used for maaser sheni. So how many times can you use a 20 pence coin? So that's where this becomes relevant. So you could use a 20 pence coin. How much? 1.5 pence going to 20? It's about 18 times. So you could use, for me, that's going to be plenty, but we don't do it very often. So you could use that coin until you've had so many 1.5 pences spent on Pidyon Masasheni, Chilul Masasheni. The other thing which I saw whilst I was browsing, and personally I've been particular about this, when the Rov sells the chametz to the guy, so he has he's selling on behalf of 10 people, 50 people, 1,000 people. So he's doing transactions, and the guy gives two sets of money, two lots of money. One is the first down payment for the purchase of the chametz, and then he puts a down payment for the rental of the premises where the chametz is stored. So it would be correct that for every lot, there should be at least one Prutah. The guy should pay at least one Prutah for every lot. So if I'm selling for 1,000 people, so then I have to work out what's 1,000 times 1.5 pence. So then, thank you. Some rabbi is pointing out I made a mistake in the cheshbon. It's not in 20 pence. It's not 30. Not 18 times. Absolutely, you're right. It's more like 13 times. Thank you, or even less. Yeah. So coming back to the mechiras chametz, it would be advised that the Rov should ask the goy for money for one Prutah for each of the people each of the clients whom he's selling chametz for. I'd like to point out something which I have the forum. I also get the forms from Chabad.org, and it's really amazing to see the. Okay, can be perhaps last year was just when just for our time zone, yeah, which time zone would be for England. It might be also for some places, perhaps Gibraltar or somewhere. But that this time zone. And about 1,000, 2,000 people will sell their chametz on Chabad.org. What I'd like to just point out is that, whereas there are those who take the view that so long as in the virtual database the names are there, that's good enough. I prefer to actually print out the document, and so I have a database printed out of those 2,000 names, let's say. What I'd like to say is, though, that there is a bit of a technical thing, that if you've got 2 or 3 addresses, so the other addresses don't come out very well in the printout. So if you are, for whatever reason, selling your chametz online, so if you have multiple addresses, I would say simply make a separate entry for each one. Instead of having one person selling, I have another address, another address. Instead, make another entry for each address, and that way all the addresses will come out in the printed shtar. Let's move on. So this came up in shiurim, in classes, about folding serviettes into shapes on Shabbos. So again, this is a quote from the Sefer Teshuvos, and he writes the following: that about folding, let's say origami, folding papers in a particular shape, like a boat, like a hat. We understand that should not be done on Shabbos. It's a form of boina, creating a structure of sorts. Now, sometimes people fold serviettes. For the American listeners, that's the French word for napkins. So sometimes people fold them in a way like a flower or something more daring than just a plain fold over. And if it is kind of representing, you look at it, oh, that's a flower or that's a bird, that kind of thing should not be done with serviettes on Shabbos. It's a kind of nira kimatakin monahi. It looks like you're making a keli. Having said that, it does say that if there are flower-shaped serviettes, you can use them to wipe yourself, etc., because it's not such a choshev opinion that there's a problem of demolishing it. If it's just folded, but often stomach, if it's just folded, but it doesn't represent, it doesn't look like anything in particular. It's just folded. That's okay, with the exception of folding things which is not creating anything. That's okay. But if you have something like a booklet, a bencher, an invitation, things which, and certainly boxes which are, let's say, they come in a flat pack and you fold them to create a box. Those things, to fold them into place, to become a proper, like a folded venture, or to a cardboard box, by folding them, you're creating a keli. That definitely should not be done on Shabbos, because of, again, makeh b'patish, it's like a finishing touch. So it looks like he's not worried about some folding a plain piece of paper. But if it's a bencher, which is, you have to fold in a particular way to make it look neat, that shouldn't be done on Shabbos. Let's move on. So someone asked about using this. I don't know how to say cafeteria or cafetiere. I don't know how to pronounce this. I'm going to keep to French press. Can you use this kind of kettle on Shabbos? So for Amaratzim like me in this kind of thing, the way it works is you first pour some coffee. Now, this is not the post instant coffee. This is Feinschmecker, real ground coffee, and you put it in the bottom, and then you pour into this glass thing, you pour hot water, and you leave it for a few minutes, and you have a kind of plunger. Now, that plunger is like a built-in strainer, and you just push it down slowly after it's managed to brew, and then the granules, whatever they're called, they remain at the bottom, and the top is Geschmack coffee. So they're asking, where is there a way to use it? Is this permissible to use on Shabbos? Now, the first thing which bothers me about this is the question of bishul. Before you get to boyer, what about bishul? Because the coffee granules have been roasted, so you have here roasted, and now it is cooked as a ma'aser of bishul. So generally, the minhag ha'olam is to rely on kli shlishi. People make tea in a kli shlishi, and the assumption is that there is basis for it, that although kli sheni is, we are concerned that kli sheni is mevashul kali habishul, but kli shlishi, there's an understanding, or at least a view, that kli shlishi doesn't. Personally, I don't understand it. I don't understand. The advantage of a kli rishon is that the walls have absorbed heat. There's an active heat. The disadvantage of a kli sheni is that the walls are cold, and therefore it's cooling off. I don't see a radical difference between kli sheni and kli shlishi. It's the same thing, just one step further. But could be, if there's very, very hot liquid in a kli shlishi, why is it different to hot liquid in a kli sheni? But there is a minhag ha'olam to, and there are sources in poskim who do condone the use of a kli shlishi. So we can deal with the kli shlishi, that can be done. Let's, instead of pouring from the kettle, to pour from one keli into this thing. The question is, what about boiler? Is using this plunger, is that a problem of boiler? So let's read carefully. This is from Siman Shin Yud Tes. Hamashamer shmorim, one who strains sediment. I know Masana b'mishameres. So you're going to pour wine, let's say, which has got loose particles, and you pour it through a strainer. So you're taking the good out of the bad, and you're using a strainer, a sieve, colander. Or it comes under a sifting. Either way, to use a strainer to separate the sediment, to separate it from the liquid, that's not allowed. However, if you have in a strainer, you have sediment from before Shabbos, and it's just stuck there. There is flavor there, but it's stuck, it's not oozing out. Mutter litein aleihem mayim b'Shabbos, kedei sheyachzeru tzlulin lozuv. You are allowed to add water to this strainer, And then that will kind of ease up the flavor in the sediment, and then it'll come out flavored. So technically, the old-fashioned tea strainers, to pour water through a tea strainer and out would come flavored tea, that seems to be okay. Again, klishlishi, there's one aspect of bishul which I discussed before, but as far as boira is concerned, it's not as if there is a confusion and you are sorting it out. Actually, no, the undesired pieces are actually very safe inside the strainer. And what you're pouring is the liquid in and liquid out. So there's no boira there, and that is okay. Next, if you'd give yayin or imayim shehein slulin. You've got clear water or wine. Mutal sananom bimashameres kadesh yehu slulin yoisa. You are allowed to put wine through a strainer, some filter of sorts. It should be more clear, or because there's kamochin apnei yayin, there's some kind of white, perhaps froth. You want to avoid that. It doesn't count as boirer. Since most people can drink it as is. So nowadays, people sometimes buy bottled water, and you also have these filter jugs. So the approach here is, if that water is drinkable, even without the filter jug, so you are allowed to use the filter jug on Shabbos, because it's drinkable in any case. So the enhancement is not a reason to forbid the using this strain. Someone's asking, what about tea bags? So the tea bags is certainly not a problem of boiler as such. The fact that there's a flavor coming out of the tea bag is not a problem. The only problem which we have with tea bags is lifting it out. So again, you're using kli shlishi, lifting the tea bag out, and as you're lifting it, a bit of essence oozes out. That's where you created a bit of pressure when you lifted it, and the pressure pushes the. So that could be seen as a problem of boirer. And therefore, if you are using a tea bag on Shabbos, you want to lift it out, lift it with a tablespoon rather than lifting it with a string. Let's come back. Then we have here another halacha in Sefer Ches. Muter la'aros benachas mikli lechaveiroi. You are allowed to pour from one bottle to another, one jug to another. Kadesha hapsoiles v'hashmorim yesharu b'shulei. You're pouring it slowly, softly, because there's sediment sitting quietly at the bottom. You don't want to agitate it, so you're going to pour carefully from the top of the jug, and the sediment will remain at the bottom of the jug. As you're pouring away from jug A into jug B, and the bottom of jug A there is a pile of sediment, so you are allowed to pour off let's say it's orange juice, and the sediment at the bottom. You don't want the sediment, the pieces. So you are allowed to pour off liquid from liquid, but sheyafsik hakiluach. Once the main body of the liquid has come out, and now the rest is now liquid which is mingled with the sediment. At that point, you have to stop pouring. At that point, so again, if you have the top is all just clear liquid, you can pour it away from the sediment. But once you get to the bottom, near the bottom, and now it's pouring away from the sediment, then you're not allowed to pour at that point. The fact that now you are pouring off from a confused state where there's liquid together with the sediment, that is already evident about it. I didn't put here on the, I don't know why I didn't, but there's also something of, even if you're using some kind of jug of pouring out, you should not put a kind of strainer at the mouth of the jug, because again, it's in of boirer. So coming back to our French press. So I actually checked I Googled this and saw several articles about this. So I saw someone saying that you could use it, but the last bit you're not allowed to pour. The truth is, though, I don't understand how you can use it at all on Shabbos, because pushing down that strainer is like you have what we saw here in the Halocho, to use a strainer where there is a confused state, and to use a strainer to separate. I see that as either a boiler or meraket. So I don't see how that could be done on Shabbos. You can ask if already there is, from before Shabbos, a plunger has been pushed down, are you allowed to pour away from it? Then the answer would be you can pour from the top, and make sure not to pour when it gets near the bottom. But to use it lechatchila on Shabbos, I don't see any way how it could be done. We did discuss about using this on Yom Tov. If anyone wants, it was this past Shabbos Shuvah, and it's available online. So you can, if you want to, dafka, worry about this for Yom Tov. So that's where it's been discussed. Okay. Was it a chasana? New question. I was at a chasana, and part of the Siddur Kiddushin is that when the chassan gets dressed, so one of the things I actually like to be careful to try to ensure that before when the chassan gets the kittel put on, it's a moment where the father gives him a bracha, and I find that a very, very special moment. And I try to keep other people, nundikus, to keep them away, so that they should be the focus, that the father should be able to give the bracha with focus, and the chassan should be able to focus without alanarishkeiten distracting. All right, so then I was at this chuppah, and so it comes to dress the chassan. So I told the father of the chassan to take the kittel to dress the. So someone else has said that he had heard that there's a point of dafka both b'chutan and dressing the chassan together. So I said, listen, this is what I was makabel this way, and but I started exploring a little bit more about this, about the dressing of the chassan. Is it done two people together, or one dafka, not two people together? Now, the hesitation of not having two people together, as we know, is that there are various minhagim that we try to avoid behaving as one would behave with a dead body, with a bar minon. So, for example, my father, Al Shalom, would be very, very particular that we shouldn't take a jug and pour like backhanded, and pour like this. And I see sometimes the goyish waiters, it seems to be more fancy to pour that way, but apparently when doing taharis, that's the way the water is poured, and therefore one wouldn't pour water for a person, a living person, in that way. There's also a minig, very cute story. Let's say the story was with a family in somewhere in Ukraine, a shluchim, and they have a home help, very helpful lady, Ivanka we'll call her, and they're making a bar mitzvah. And the mother noticed that Shloimela's got a button has fallen off. So the mother says, Ivanka, do you mind sewing on Shloimela's button? So sure, no problem. She takes the sewing kit and takes a button, sews it on, and she gives Shloimela a piece of thread to chew. So the mother says, Ivanka, why did you give Shloimela a piece of thread to chew? She says, well, that's how my mother used to do. So through this, that was the thread which led them to find out that she was actually Jewish. But Ivanka didn't know that her mother was Jewish, but through keeping this minhag. So what's the background of this minhag? Because the tachrichim are sewn on the body, so there's a kpeda not to behave with a living person the way that when you behave with a barmin or with a dead person. So this is the hesitation. Now, so let's trace a little bit about this minhag of dressing the chassan. So one of the specialists for him, going back from, 150 years ago, there's a sefer called Shulchan HaEzer, and he writes about the minhag of dressing the chassan. Now, there's a minhag, you have there on the top right, there's a minhag of other people dressing the chassan. It says a shem cheirus, because it's chassan doime lemelech. So this idea of dressing the chassan rather than the chassan dressing himself in a way to emulate to emphasize the idea there's Dayan Levi and that Kohen Gadol, which others dress him. He also throws in, though, that it's similar, like on Pesach night, that in the Welt has a minhag that you don't pour your own wines for yourself. Someone else pours the wine for you. Chabad, we don't have that minhag, but there is this Weltish minhag which he's referring to. So someone else is mishamish. That's a way of a melech cherus that someone else is. So he's saying that the idea that other people dress the chassan is got to do with the idyon of chassan Dayan Levi. There are other things, though, which we do have with the chassan that we do also of Vayakhel hamisa. For example, the minhag of not wearing any jewelry under the chuppah, not wearing cufflinks and not wearing a watch and whatever, is got to do with the idea of Vayakhel hamisa. Remembering that when we after 120, we don't take anything with. So that's the reason for that minhag. Tell the story that the Reichman, one of the Reichman brothers, so he left a will, and he wrote in the will that he wants to be buried with this particular pair of socks, or colored socks. And he had also, together with that, he had another envelope to be opened after the week of Shiva. So after he passed away, so they came to the Chevre Kaddish that Mr. Reichman had asked, a multimillionaire for those who are not familiar, he asked to be buried with this colored pair of socks. And they said, sorry, we have a minhag as only linen clothes, nothing else, and so we can't oblige, sorry. A week later, they opened the second envelope, and it reads, you see, that even your socks you can't take to the next world. So that was his, so there is this idea of a chassan is Vayakhel hamisa. So therefore, that's why I have this dilemma. On the one hand, there is a hanhaga of Vayakhel hamisa, and perhaps also that's the reason for wearing a kittel. The kittel is like tachrichim, again to remember Yom hamisa. That's one of the messages of the kittel, which the Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Pesach talks about the minhag of wearing a kittel, and he says that in case you're going to feel too smug and too proud, etc., so you wear the kittel. So the Shulchan Aruch says wearing the kittel is an expression of cherus. The Alter Rebbe brings that wearing a kittel is a union of Vayakhel hamisa. So we've got two sides. So coming back, so both are true. Both messages are true. The chassan Dayan Levi and there's also Vayakhel hamisa. The question is, in the dressing, are we going to dafka not dress together because we don't want to do in a way we do it at the mace, or dafka do it that way because of Vayakhel hamisa? So evidently there's different minhagim, and I'm curious what is the more predominant Chabad minhag about this. But what I do see, I did look up in the Rebbe's biography, in the Sefer Yemei Melech, it has a write-up, details about the Rebbe's chasana, and it has how the before the Badekin, so he goes into they went to a side room, and they spent the father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe and our Rebbe, spent a short while there, and someone who was there says how the Rebbe put on the Frierdiker Rebbe put on the gartel to the chassan, and he said he would like to say the broch of Oizer Yisrael B'Gvura, but he said in the morning so he can't say it again. And he put on the gartel to the Rebbe, and he says, with this I am binding you with me in this world and the world to come. So the Frierdiker Rebbe put on the gartel alone on the Rebbe. It wasn't with someone else. Of course, you can say that perhaps someone else did something else, and perhaps the Rebbe is different. But meanwhile, I have a shtickle, at least nothing to the opposite. Okay, so as I say, there's a minhag, and there's different ways of the application. I'm curious to hear a bit more a Clarkite which way, but I just follow the way I was taught. I'll say I've been seeing Hakan Olav Shalom. He was very particular how to run things, and I believe he took guidance perhaps from Rabbi Sudak Olav Shalom, perhaps from Rebbe Chaiken Zayin Gesund, but he did take guidance. So good. Now, finally, someone asked me the following: they are particular. If they have a nap during the day, so they would go and wash Negelwasser, which is correct. And as we've discussed before, Negelwasser during the day doesn't. If you sleep during the day, it doesn't have to be next to the bed. You can go over. But the thing is that in the sink, there's dishes there. So, is there a problem of washing the Negelwasser, which is to dispel Ruach Ra? Is it a problem that there's dishes and you're going to have now the Ruach Ra water on the dishes? So what we have over here, number one, this is from the Alter Rebbe in Madura Kama Siman Daled, about not washing Netilas Yadayim on the floor. Those times they used to have earthen floors. It was conceivable, but it should be in the keli. Then there's a Tov Sheyeh Kli HaTachton Mos. The lower keli, the bowl should be despicable. It's water which is going to klipper, and so it should be. And similarly, by the way, the Frierdiker Rebbe is mentioned in the Sefer Sichos, did not like to use for mayim achronim, not to use a silver bowl to pour the water, because it's zechelik the adam rosha, the water is kind of feeding to klipper, and therefore not to use a fancy dish for the mayim achronim. It should be dafka something which is not choshev. But meanwhile, the Alter Rebbe also says about not leaving Negelwasser overnight in the house, le'yinin b'bayis. Okay, so there is the Negelwasser has got an inning of Ruach Ra. Now, coming to the left of the screen, so we have here again from Piskei Teshuvos, and now this is in the dinim of mayim achronim. He says pouring mayim achronim into the sink would be okay, but there shouldn't be dishes there. And he says, "V'yesh lo orer hakach." I want to arouse people's attention to this. People are not so careful, and they would wash mayim achronim where whilst there are dishes and cups in the sink, and there is an element of sakana, the idea of ruach ra, etc. So this is a little bit of a surprise to me, but there seems to be ample sources to be careful not to have neither Negelwasser nor mayim achronim, not to pour where there are dishes which are going to be used for other things. If you did already, so the Church Rov says washing it off afterwards is okay. But I have heard of people being particular not to use a regular bowl for mayim achronim, and certainly I've seen that in Sforim that the bowl which you use for Negelwasser should not be a regular mixing bowl. You should avoid not to use such a bowl for Negelwasser. I see, is that Rabbi Reuven Cohen probably, right? So by achasness, we alternated between the fathers, right? So that's Rabbi Tzion Olav Shalom. He would make a point that, let's say, the father of the chosn puts him on the kittel, and the father of the kallah puts on the gartel, and so on, but not to have two people at once. That's the way I was taught, and until I find out otherwise. I'd like just to finish off, and we learned a very beautiful mimer today from Tafshin Chaf Hei. And the beginning of Vayikra, it says Vayikra el Moshe, Vaydaber Hashem Elov. So Vayikra el Moshe is expression of chiba, of love, this calling to Moshe in this way. So the Rebbe says Vayikra, the chiba. What about the last two words of the pasuk? Is la'ash mo'avo. A person had sinned and has to bring a korban, etc. So Reb Nachman Yosef Willem pointed out to me that the word la'ash mabo is an abbreviation for lokel asher shovas mikol hamasim bayom hashvi. So that's what we say after Kel Odo in the opening of that phrase. The next paragraph is with those 7 words, lokel asher shovas mikol hamasim bayom hashvi. And so what's the connection? So you see, this is from the Sefer Morav Shomesh, and the idea is he explains this, that like korbanos will atone for a guilt, la'ashma for a guilt. So then keeping Shabbos is also a form of atonement, that when a person is shomer Shabbos kol chosoi, so he is forgiven for all his sins, and we keep Shabbos as it should be. We will be meriting the forthcoming geula, as it says in the Gemara. If Eden would keep 2 Shabboses, which is also explained in Chassidus, I'm not going to go into that, about the idea of 2 Shabboses, higher Shabbos, not the Shabbos. We'll keep Shabboses, we'll have the Geula, should be Zoichet, the Geula, Amitas Bashlema, and a special welcome to Rabbi Labitansky, and Baruch Hashem, B'mkayim B'vtochim, and again, wishing Achayna B'nai Yisrael, I've mentioned the beginning of this year, both those who are in Ukraine and those who have managed to flee from Ukraine should have Ach Tov V'Chesed, Tov Hanir V'Hanigla, and A gute Woche. If you're all muted, sorry, I'm trying to unmute. Now, oh, here it is. Oh, yeah. Okay, so anyone to unmute, you're welcome to.